Welcome back to Hohman Design. I'm Tom Hohman, and we're in the middle of our Saturn V build. When we left, I was just about to start cutting out all the vacuform wraps to go around the first and portion of the second stage of the rocket. We've got those all cut out and taped up to the rocket. Apogee provides great information about how to mark your main tube and position each of the wraps as you go. They've got some ingenious things figured out where these tunnels are going to cover certain seams in the rocket, and so we're all set to go. Before I super glue the wraps into place though, I want to insert the motor mount to ensure that the tube is round, because if it was slightly elliptical and then I force it back into a round shape inserting the motor mount, I'm afraid we could crack some of the wraps into super glue. So let's set this aside for just a sec. And before we can install that motor mount, we need to install our main shock cord. And this will be for the main chute that brings this entire first stage back down. So we can get rid of our vacuform wrap scraps here. And we're going to need a 36-inch length of the thick shock cord that's provided in this kit. I can use my cutting mat right here, the measuring stick. We'll just measure out 12, 24, 36 inches. And it'd be just like me not to have the tools that I need handy, but we've got them somewhere. Not hemostats, but scissors or a knife. We can do that. Now we're gonna wrap this shock cord around the main tube and tie a knot in it. And I'm going to go ahead and tie a square knot so that the tighter it gets pulled on, the tighter it gets. There we go. Right over left, left over right. Pull that super tight and then choke it up. So that's what we want. And to make sure that this all stays together, we're going to glue it all down. So let's get some wood glue. And we'll choke it up around the tube. And then we're going to apply a fillet of glue all around the cord, gluing it to the tube. That's exactly what we want. And the last step we're going to do is glue about 1 inch of the Kevlar cord down to the plate here. All right, we'll just set that aside to dry. Okay, while the motor mount's drying, we're going to take a look at the engines. I've been working on the engines, and I've got one at each stage in the process of how I want to paint these engines. They say to just paint the engines silver, but since I really plan to display the rocket in the future, I can do a little more. I'm not going to go too crazy because they're not highly detailed. There are kits at a much smaller scale that have much more detailed engines, but for a flying model rocket, this is pretty great. But I think I can do 1 or 2 things to it just to take it another step. So we start out with our motors that are just the white plastic. They need a little sanding and then to get painted black inside, because even though I'm going to paint them this nice kind of champagne silver color, and I'm going to allow that dust to overspray inside. I do want them all to kind of fade to black inside, deep down in there. So let's see, we have 2 steps, I think, of sanding this engine right here. There's just some of our glue and some manufacturing debris inside that we want to sand smooth. All right, that looks pretty good. I have this damp cloth. I'll just wipe this off so that our paint adheres. Now I'm going to want to mask off the engines. We'll use our hole guide and find something that's going to create the effect that I want. We'll draw that on. And we'll cut that out. You don't have to be too precise here. Just creating a loose mask. This hole is smaller than the opening on the nozzle. Tape that right on the engine. Just cover everything else. Okay. Just leave that one out to dry and take a look at the next engine. This one's been unmasked and it's ready to receive this nice kind of champagne colored silvery gray that I think looks like titanium. It's great. Just the masking that's got paint on it. If I demask this, we can just set it on the table. The next thing I wanted to do was get some other silver colors involved. When I looked at some reference photos of the engines, I probably saw a minimum of like immediately recognizable, like 7 distinct metallic colors, mostly all versions of silver. And so I've just picked out another one that I know would highly contrast from the dark silver. And so I've masked this engine off and painted a portion of it in the silver. And I'm just using this bright metallic paint to do that. And I've just chosen the portions according to the reference photograph I want to do that with. And the last thing I want to do to this engine is try to create a little bluing on a portion of this. I don't know if this will be successful, and we'll do it on the one, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll just recoat it one more time and just stop here, or maybe with a weathered wash. But I've got some purple, and metallic blue paints that on this chrome-like finish might end up looking like the bluing you see on like the muffler of a motorcycle. I think of the opening scene from Lawrence of Arabia. I think the opening shots with the muffler of the motorcycle and the effects of the heat on the muffler. So let's try a little blue and a little silver on this. Just a tiny dusting to each side. I may have to get in there with my hands and do something to it to make it work. But if it works, then we'll unmask this one and check out the contrast we have in our 2 silvers. Silver, there are some old paints I happen to have laying around, and the silver kind of sprays well. The blue I don't trust so much, so I might just Get a little of this in the air. Just grab a little bit of it. Put it all in one right there. Tiny dusting. I don't even know if something like this would show up on the camera. But to the naked eye now on the other side, I'm gonna come in with the blue. And this is a lot more dangerous. And it's kind of flecking when I apply it, so I'm just dabbing it to take the darkest flecks away. And it may leave a bluish hue to one side, a purplish hue to the other. And I think that's as far as I want to go. So we can unmask this and see the big difference, which will be the contrast in the two silver paints. See though? I'm happy with how we've created a couple different silver colors on the engine, and I think I'm going to do a black wash across the whole engine. But the last thing I want to do is paint some of these ribs silver, and I think the cheap and dirty way to get there is going to be just to hit the tips of these ribs with a marker. Created some additional layers of striation here. And now I think with a wash, it'll kind of blend some of the contrasts that are too stark together, and even some of my sanding marks are going to end up being emboldened, which are just as likely to look like an error as to look like all the tiny ribs. This engine was basically a coil through which all the fuel flowed before going into the nozzle, so it could be pre-warmed or used to cool the nozzle, rather, depending on how you look at it. So I think that's going to create the visual effect we want, especially at a distance. The cluster of these 5 engines is going to look beautiful. Pretty amazing stuff. I think we'll just take all of our engines through that evolution, through those evolutions, and we'll have finished this the decorative motor mount. Before we get the motor mount installed into the main tube, something's arrived, and it's in this box right here. The parachutes that come with the Apogee Saturn V kit are great quality. In fact, the smaller parachute, I think there's a 5-foot and a 3-foot parachute, and the smaller parachute is fluorescent pink, and it's kind of awesome. And I want to fly it on one of my rockets. But the larger parachute is branded with the Apogee brand, which I understand, but it kind of has some faded printed patterns that really don't feel like the right thing for our Saturn V. So I contacted Kai Michelson and his son Buddy at Rocketman Parachutes, who are making a limited edition series of Apollo-style parachutes during this 50th anniversary year. So our chutes have arrived, and we're going to take a look at them right now. We've got one 5-foot diameter parachute that'll bring back this entire first section, and then we've got a smaller 3 diameter chute that's going to bring down the second section. So let's see what we got here. Fantastic. These are our Nomex heat shields. Our parachutes get wrapped up in this just like a Chipotle burrito. It's the exact same pattern you follow to pack your parachute in the flame shield and protect it. And we'll pack our parachute on launch day. But here are ultra thin, ultra lightweight parachutes in alternating orange and white stripes inspired by the Apollo chutes. Oh, these are going to be beautiful. Oh, wow. These chutes have a spill hole at the top. Now, a regular round parachute will oscillate wildly from side to side as air spills out the side of the parachute because it's all trapped under the canopy. A chute with a spill hole or with slots all around it, like the actual Apollo chutes, will come down in a stable manner because the rushing air that fills the parachute to kind of maximum inflation, some of it will be spilling out the porthole so it can come down steady. This chute has got the orange and white alternating panels between each gore of the parachute. There are more gores in the large parachute than there are in the small. That's pretty standard. There were like 60 or 70 in the actual Apollo chute, but I think we've got 10 or 12 here in this chute. They're still going to look great with our Saturn V rocket. Now, Kai and his son Buddy, along with their group, the Civilian Space Exploration Team in 2004, were the first civilians to launch an amateur rocket over the Kármán line. They, I think, documented their flight up to 72 miles. And so they're pretty special folks. They were super fun to talk to and work with, and I already love these parachutes, and I can't wait to see our Saturn V coming down on these chutes. I'm going to put these away and we'll glue in our motor mount. So before I can super glue the wraps onto the main tube, we're going to get this motor mount installed. And this should be fairly simple. We just install the tube and then put a fillet of glue in behind it. So let's dress our cord in here. And then we're going to countersink it to 3 3/8 of an inch. This is one thing I'll say about the kit. The kit is so well designed and their communication and instructions are so good. I don't know if I would call this a skill level 5 kit, with the exception of perhaps this issue, in which in the instructions you're given the wrong depth with which to set this motor mount, and it probably won't affect your flying, but it will affect how your decorative base fits in here and displays the engines out to the correct distance. So it's very hard to catch the correction in the videos if you're not paying attention, and you can also go to the website where you'll see it documented, but you have to be looking. You have to know to patiently read through the PDF instructions, watch all the video instructions, and hunt around the page that advertises the kit to look for any other bits of helpful information that you can get. And you will certainly come across this issue corrected by Apogee, but you will need to be mature, patient, paying attention, and you'll get it. But that's the one thing you could really botch if you're not paying attention. But we've got ours set here. Just double checking this. We want to recess it precisely actually to 3 13/32, but that's just over 3/8. And I've got that set here, double checking all those dimensions. One thing I'll say is that it'll be better if you build this kit a little more quickly. Some of the rings that I glued up and left for days kind of have a wave in them now, and it would have been better to go ahead and glue this into the next tube before the glue dried and started warping the cardboard a little bit. I don't see anything drastic, but like I can see tiny differences in the dimensions made around the wing because of the wave in that cardboard. But I think we're ready to go in here and install a fillet of glue all along that junction. Glue. Oops. Now, I kind of put in way too much glue, but what we'll go ahead and do is put our thrust ring in right after it so it gets to fit into all that glue. I've got the thrust ring firmly glued up against the tab, and there's already enough glue for me to just spread the next fillet between the spacer and the thrust ring. Really good. On the top thrust ring, we're going to add another fillet of glue between the front edge of the thrust ring and the main tube. But since we slide in our decorative mount here, we don't want to create an obstruction to that fit. So we'll just repeat this process on the other end of this tube and then get to super gluing on our wraps. Okay, we've got our transition done here, and we've got another one to build at the upper transition. I've been cutting out the elements that it will take to do that, including this sheet, which will give us our structure. Once we've installed that, we'll impregnate it with CA glue like we did here. And then we have a decorative wrap that goes over it, and that's the embossed cardboard wrap that has some of the great detail in it. And finally, we'll wrap on our raised ink wrap for the command service module, and that'll be the upper transition. But I want to come back to this in a minute. We're almost done with this section here. I've cut out the next few wraps that go here and here, and I've got one more to prepare, which is the transition wrap. So let's cut out this piece of Accuform and install it, and then we'll fill in some of the tube seams here with spot putty to get that ready for painting the portion that's not covered by wraps. First, I'm going to cut away the material that I know we don't need quickly so that we have something that's easier to work with. The tension's high when you're super gluing these wraps on. They're so fragile. If you made a mistake, you'd never get them off again, so without destroying them. So we have a nice shoulder here for our tube coupler to go in and for the upper section of the rocket to rest on the bottom section. And I know where these next wraps go, but I wanted to demonstrate our spot glazing technique for the tube seams. We can see that there are a couple sets of seams. One's a slight embossment, and the other one is actually the width of the paper aligned with the neighboring width of paper that's applied in the spiral form. So I'm just using some Bondo spot glazing putty, literally, and a razor blade as a trowel. My hotel cards are not even as precise as I want to get. I just want to fill these hairline cracks very precisely with just enough material here. There we go, from line to line. That's all I want to do. I prefer not to put any more primer or putty anywhere where I want to end up super gluing the next wrap. I want to have glue contact between the plastic and the cardboard. Right, so that's the majority of filling we do on those seams. So that's what we did on the main tube here. We went ahead and applied one more final coat on top and then sanded it back, and now this feels good. This feels like it's ready for our top layer of primer. Now I wanted to protect our vacuform wraps from accruing too many layers of primer, so I went ahead and masked those off. And now that I'm ready for our final primer coat, and I'll just wet sand that over the cardboard tube areas, I can go ahead and unmask the bottom of the rocket here so that we can glue on some of our next elements. Okay, the next thing we'll do is use some thick S.T.E.A. glue to install our kind of fairing supports. And I'm recalling a helpful tip that Tim gave us that we better go ahead and do right away, which is to go ahead and install our decorative engine element so that we make sure we don't distort the tube as we go ahead and glue these into place, that we're not pressing down, collapsing the tube, and then setting it into place with any of these glued supports. We're going to use epoxy putty to mount these fairings over top of the support structures, and then putty the corners as well. That'll be pretty involved. That might be one of my late night off-camera projects. So we'll get to that soon. Let's take a look and see what else we can do here. This guy needs get his transition mounted. The first thing we'll do is just finish building this. So that went together with rubber cement, and we'll do that again. Holds together real quickly and real well for a short period. So let's go ahead and get some rubber cement. Of course, we wait for rubber cement to dry before adhering the sides, so this looks real glossy now while it's wet. As soon as it becomes matte finish, we'll know it's time to play our game. So this is the coupling element that came with it. Give these a second to dry. This is already dry. Now, while we give that a second, I'm gonna need to sand. Looks like I've already done this side. I can feel I've already saturated this edge with super glue after sanding it. I just need a fine sand of this edge. But this top edge is one that needs to be beveled for the reception of this transition. So I can go ahead and do a little of that. Just use a little pressure to adhere that seam. I've got a perfect seam. Let's go ahead and test fit it. Sleeves right over the tube beautifully. So oh, there we go. Yeah, that's an excellent fit. So that's ready for glue. All right, so this will be one layer. We'll super glue that and impregnate it with super glue. And then we'll come back opposite the seam and attach our decorative shroud. And these transitions can be relatively fragile areas on the rocket, but together, this double layered cardboard I think is going to be strong enough not to feel like we're going to crush it in our hands. Here's our command service module right here. Seeing that take shape is pretty exciting. Let's see if our capsule fits over it. Oh, that's fantastic. As we get parts onto this rocket, they're coming off of the table and we're seeing it starting to clear out, and that's pretty exciting. We have just a few parts left, our decal sheets and some paint guides. Everything else is pretty much in assembly. We've got our launch lugs, since we actually plan to fly this rocket, and our fins and a couple details. But once you get these parts into assembly and get a single color on them, they really come to life. And we're kind of at that point where we are putting some glazing compound on our spot glazing putty on stuff and priming it or painting it at this point. So I think I want to go ahead and do the cardboard spirals on the launch tower here, and at least the seam between the nose cone and that tower. And I know I mentioned early on that I love using hotel room keys as trowels, but this work has been so fine. I'm using a single edge razor blade to do this work with even kind of more precision. So I just get a tiny little bit of that going. When we did this on the bigger tubes, you could see the tiny hairline fill that we were doing. Left very little kind of post-processing to do. You literally can hardly make a few passes before it's drying on your trowel. And so you gotta constantly keep it clean blade and go back for fresh material. But this lumpy bit of madness here is going to be okay because it'll sand off so easily. Well, I got some primer on this, and it surely is a little more exciting to see it, a little more realistic. I still see a few flaws. I'm going to be doing one more sanding pass around this tunnel cover. I don't think I'm going to have to spray it with a high build primer. I think I just need to sand down what's already here, and then we'll hit it with some paint. So we'll let this dry tonight, and maybe we'll get to this in a minute. We're at that point where most of what's left is putty and priming. Now, the biggest challenge of this kit so far, I've already mentioned it, and it was how these engine strut like covers mount, and we do that with epoxy clay, but it sure required a lot more than I was hoping for. The gaps were a lot larger than I had hoped for, and I've done about 2 passes on everything here, and it looks like I'm going to want to do one more. Now, we're using our 2-part epoxy clay for this job, and I just grab a little bit, ball up a little bit into my hand, and I get 50-50 parts A and B. I get a little matching dollop of the other part, and I just knead it together. And it makes a little clay. It feels like a kneadable eraser, but it's a little more tacky and a little residue sticks to your hand. See, most people wear gloves when they do this, but in the end, I'm going to wet my finger with some alcohol to smooth this out. And I can't have a glove making all those choices for me when it comes time to become a human trowel. So then I might just grab a very small bit of it and basically pre-build a small bead, a string of this that I can lay down where I need it. Alright, I'm gonna let this layer dry. I still think it's gonna need a little more attention. Maybe we'll use some glazing and spot putty at the end, like we did here. Let's go ahead and dress this up. So this is, I think there's, I don't want to sand down to the cardboard and get the cardboard all fuzzy. So, and there's a little bit more detail I want to reveal or erase here. And so I'm going to want to add a little something back onto this that I can work back down. And I think I'm going to use filling primer for that, a high build primer. And I don't want to add that to the fine detail on this rocket and soften that in any way. So I think what I'll do is mask off the tower and spray just a little high build primer on that upper portion. Got some high-end Duplicoat primer filler, and we used it on this body tube here, and it did a great job. Maybe having trouble with this can or the nozzle, as long as it doesn't sheet, though even then the highly sandable primer, I'd just be able to sand those beads of paint away, but I can see this kind of frosting up and getting dull before my eyes, so it's not going to run. Alright, well, while we let that dry, I think one of the last things we have to do here in terms of prepping some material is to cut our decal sheets out. And we don't have to cut these decals precisely. We're just cutting them into single decals so that they're a little easier to work with when we dip them in the water and release them from the sheet. So just going to be liberating each decal from the group here. All right, we've got this rocket put together now, finally. And we got a coat of paint on everything, and it really starts to come together here. And I'm seeing a Saturn V rocket here. But we still have to put on our accent color. And one thing I forgot to do, since we're gonna fly this rocket, is attach the launch lugs. And because I've already painted the rocket, I sure wish I had done that before I painted it, but we're gonna wanna sand away a small area so I get good carpenter's glue, contact surface to contact surface, the materials that are meant to be bonded, cardboard and wood. And so I'll probably use like a little needle file and just gouge away a small area with which to make great contact for these launch lugs. I'll pre-paint them so that once they're attached, I won't have to add any more paint to the rocket. We've got to move out smartly, getting our accent color on the rocket now, which is what we're doing on this section first. One thing I'll say about this kit is it has earned its reputation in terms of difficulty level just with this step. The instructions are found lacking a little bit, and it's mostly that the imagery that they provide doesn't necessarily match the detail you find on the wrap. So I have a couple extra antennas that are not on the drawing, and you don't know whether they should be white or whether they should be black. Our tunnel cover is a slightly different shape and ends at a slightly different position. So you're trying to make this match the painting guideline as closely as possible, and it's not always coming together, but you can sort your way through. I've made a couple small mistakes. Luckily, a little rubbing alcohol was able to take up the Sharpie or the Permapaint marker if I made a small error. I think I'm sweating stuff that will never show up when you behold the rocket as a whole. The tiny stuff I'm seeing through these magnifying glasses will not matter. So what we've done is we've come in and we've drawn our lines and pulled a little black color into the areas that will be black, and I've labeled each section to keep my head straight as I went around and prepared this portion. I've come back with a liquid mask and masked right up to the black and a little over, so that after I paint and I take up my protected areas and the mask comes up with it, it'll leave back the original line, which I drew painstakingly by hand. I first used the Sharpie, which was kind of coming out very purple, and then I came back with my Permapaint marker without quite a finest tip, but I was able to add a little color and a good looking color. So it's time to put some liquid mask on here, then go ahead and paper mask in general, and we can shoot some black on this. Reason to be careful with this stuff is I do want the black paint to come and cover most of the black marker. I don't want to worry about which marker doesn't match the paint well, etc. So the more accurate I can be with the masking in my tape job, the more I can simply just come back and reveal a fully painted surface. While this batch of liquid mask sets up, the portion we did earlier today is ready to be painted. So I am really quickly just prepping some masking paper and tape. So that we can do the larger portions we need to mask here. Just giving everything a last once over. Some of the tape, you can even prep the tape by putting it against your skin somewhere, picking up a little oil and making it less tacky. And when you do that, to make sure you get a clean line and a safe release, it can also mean that one piece of tape is pulling up another piece of tape. And I want to make sure that everything's down before we shoot. And we're looking pretty good. Okay, it's been just a few minutes since we shot this, and it doesn't take long. That's why I love Krylon. This is already dry to the touch. We're going to see what we've got here. We'll make sure to get a close-up shot of when we get to the liquid mask and see how that comes up. In the meantime, just want to get rid of some of our bulk paper here. I still want to be careful not to drag the tape through the work. So I'll be carefully removing the masking here. Here's a nice another piece of the mask is coming up. Some of it's still there. You can see it's just like a little elastic sheet. But we'll pull that up with our X-Acto knife in just a minute. Alright, just a few bits of mask to remove here, and once this is dry, we'll get the top of this shot too. That'll finish one small portion of the rocket, and we just have the rest of this big section to go. And some of this is going to get tricky around these details. Luckily, we've got the mask, and it's working great. So I'm encouraged, and we'll keep going here. I love some of the incredible detail on this kit. I just keep geeking out over it. I love the fragile support structure for the escape tower, and I love the reaction control system thrusters that you see here. Those were actually comprised of 3 tiny parts that you had to actually assemble, and then you take those little sub-assemblies and glue them onto the command module here. I'll say this, I was afraid I had ruined that wrap by priming it. And if I had it to do again, I would not prime that part because my primer, even though it wasn't a filling primer, removed some of that detail. So I very lightly sanded it, which I knew was just as likely to make it worse as better because I might have sanded down the high spots, leaving the filled low spots, erasing even more of the detail. But it actually helped, and when I shot it with the silver, some of it's come back. So on close inspection, you see some of the great raised ink detail on the wrap, on the command module. But these thrusters set it apart, and certainly when we get some decals on there, it'll jump up another level in interest. So we've got our decals ready to go here, and I think while some of our different paint layers are drying, we'll get some of these decals on. Okay, we are done with this build, and we're just touching up some of where our micro mask brought some of the paint up with it, or where some of the marker flaked off or paint flaked off for whatever reason, and we're just making sure we've got all of our fine detail work in here, which will make this thing really pop. The decals for this rocket really bring it to life with the smallest decals and accurate to each mission. There's a few different decals that you apply depending on which mission you're recreating, and of course we selected our Apollo 11 decals. Let's see here. Where I have the lines. This guy here. Now I've got some art tape already wrapped on this section to get ready to fly the rocket, because we want that to be a very tight fit. It's just friction fit. Along with our capsule, I've got some painter's tape on here, because it too is just friction fit. We've loaded some modeling clay into the nose to add weight, and we're friction fitting the top. We're ready to fly. The last thing we did was start some of our parachute rigging. I've got a slip knot here at this end of the rigging, and some of the Kevlar shock cord, and we've formed a little self-tightening loop to put around the nose here. Now, when the rocket comes down, it'll fly in at an angle like this and make sure we don't land on the nose. So, one of the fun details, final details I added based on a reference photograph was the silver tip on the top of the escape tower. So, yeah, this thing's a beauty. The incredible detail again. Every first stage was, of course, identified for its mission. We've got that decal in place here, and the rest of the decals look phenomenal. I got my launch lugs attached. I didn't put them where they recommended, and sure enough, I came up with a small detail where one of my decals ended up overlapping the launch lug, but I kind of still think I prefer where they land, so I could actually fly it off the gantry and have the correct portion of the rocket facing the gantry and the launch lug on the far side of the gantry. So that's why I did that. And one of the things that I did in order to add those to the rocket that was already painted was I just took a nail file and I cut, I'll make a fresh tip, and then kind of cut a shape into it and made myself a little emery board that's as wide as the portion of the rocket I wanted to scuff. And I came in and I was able to reveal just a portion of the cardboard where I could get my launch lug attached with carpenter's glue, and that allowed us to finish things and really come to life when we got the decals on. Wow, we've come a long way since we started with our Lego model behind us here, and we've now got our 1/70th scale flying Saturn V. The next step will be to rig an engine to this thing and go fly it.